"You can write a song anywhere," Brad Arnold once said, describing how lyrics came to him while working outside or sitting quietly with his thoughts. That line alone explains why his music never felt manufactured. Brad was never chasing spectacle or perfection. He was chasing truth. Long before awards, chart positions, or packed arenas, he understood that music only works when it's honest. Over the years, his voice became a refuge for people who needed reassurance, strength, or simply to feel less alone. He didn't sing from a pedestal, he sang from the same ground everyone else stood on. That authenticity is what drew people in. This story isn't about creating a larger-than-life image. It's about honoring a man who showed up with his heart open even when life demanded more resilience than comfort. On Shadows of Stardom, we step away from the stage lights to explore how quiet moments, persistence, and sincerity shape a legacy that lasts longer than fame. The weight inside the songs. For countless listeners, songs like "It's Not My Time" became anchors during moments of uncertainty, distance, and emotional strain. There's a quiet irony in how artists often give to the world comfort while carrying heavy responsibilities themselves. Brad Arnold never presented himself as untouchable or flawless. Even when singing about strength or invincibility, his words always hinted at vulnerability beneath the surface. On stage, audiences saw confidence and familiarity, but behind the scenes was the pressure of expectation, repetition, and responsibility. Year after year, he showed up, not because it was easy, but because music remained the most honest language he knew. The stage wasn't a shield. It was a place of connection. Brad didn't want admiration built on illusion. He wanted listeners to recognize themselves in the lyrics. That mutual understanding is why the songs endured. They weren't about escaping reality. They were about acknowledging it and finding something steady to hold on to. Roots in Escatawpa. Before radio dominance and sold-out tours, there was Escatawpa, Mississippi. A small town defined more by routine than ambition. No shortcuts existed there, and none were expected. As a teenager, Brad Arnold found rhythm in everyday moments, tapping beats during class, and letting melodies form where others saw boredom. That environment shaped him. Songs like Kryptonite weren't born from marketing strategies, but from observation, imagination, and emotional instinct. When Three Doors Down formed in the mid-1990s, legacy wasn't a consideration. Sound was, feeling was, truth was. When The Better Life arrived in 2000, its success surprised even the band. People didn't connect because it sounded trendy. They connected because it sounded familiar. Kryptonite wasn't about superheroes or fantasy. It was about flaws, pressure, and internal conflict. Listeners heard themselves in those lines, and that recognition turned a small town idea into a global anthem. When success changes the air, success doesn't arrive quietly. It amplifies everything around it, joy, pressure, and responsibility alike. As Three Doors Down grew, the pace intensified. Tours stretched longer, expectations grew louder. The excitement of opportunity came paired with the challenge of maintaining balance. Over time, the band faced moments that reshaped its path and perspective. Loss, change, and transition left marks that couldn't be ignored. Brad Arnold found himself carrying not only the role of frontman, but also the emotional weight of shared history. Being the one who remains isn't a celebration. It's a commitment. Through it all, he continued to show up with consistency and respect for the music. There were no dramatic declarations, no public unraveling, just quiet choices made offstage to protect what mattered most. The road taught him that endurance isn't about pushing harder. It's about listening, adjusting, and continuing with intention rather than ego. Choosing clarity. At a certain point, reflection demands action. For Brad Arnold, clarity became more valuable than excess. He chose a path centered on responsibility, presence, and awareness, not as a public statement, but as a personal decision. Over time, those choices reshaped how he approached both Legalikau and music like. Fans noticed Subtle changes. Water instead of indulgence, gratitude replacing chaos, steadiness replacing volatility. He didn't frame it as transformation for applause. He framed it as survival through honesty. What mattered was showing up clear-minded and grounded. His songwriting reflected that shift, leaning less on struggle and more on perseverance. The music didn't lose its edge, it gained depth. Brad demonstrated that growth doesn't require inspiration, it requires alignment. By choosing clarity, he preserved not only his voice, but the trust of those who listened. That trust, built quietly and consistently, became one of the most powerful elements of his long-standing connection with fans. Faith as foundation. As stability settled in, Brad began speaking more openly about faith, not as doctrine, but as grounding. He never used the microphone to instruct or convince. Instead, he shared his perspective through action and consistency. Faith, for him, wasn't about certainty. It was about trust when certainty wasn't available. He spoke of accountability, humility, and gratitude as daily practices rather than grand gestures. When life presented unexpected challenges, his response remained measured and sincere. He addressed them with acceptance rather than dramatization, choosing transparency without spectacle. His message was simple. Fear loses its grip when faced honestly. That approach mirrored the heart of his songwriting, direct, human, and unfiltered. Listeners didn't hear speeches. They heard reassurance. By grounding himself in belief and responsibility, Brad reinforced the idea that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet consistency. Sometimes it's standing still and choosing hope without needing to explain it. Music that lives beyond the moment. The true reach of Brad Arnold's work can't be measured by charts or accolades. It lives in moments that matter. Weddings, long drives, reunions, quiet evenings, and personal milestones. His songs became companions rather than performances. That's where legacy exists. In memory, not promotion. He never asked listeners to dwell on hardship or fear. He asked them to remember connection, to remember that music can hold space when words fail. The reason his voice continues to resonate is because it never pretended to be something it wasn't. It acknowledged fragility without surrendering to it. Brad understood that people don't want perfection. They want recognition. They want to feel seen. Every chorus, every verse carried that intention. Long after the lights dim, the songs remain present, weaving themselves into everyday life. That presence is proof that authenticity lasts longer than novelty and sincerity outlives spectacle. A legacy without illusion. Brad Arnold's story isn't defined by dramatic endings or exaggerated myth. It's defined by consistency, humility, and emotional truth. He showed that real strength isn't invulnerability. It's endurance with openness, creating while tired, showing up without certainty, loving music enough to let it evolve with you. He never tried to be a symbol. He tried to be real. And that choice made all the difference. His work reminds us that legacy doesn't require perfection or constant reinvention. It requires honesty, sustained over time. Every listener who finds comfort in his voice becomes part of that legacy. Every moment of recognition, quiet or loud, keeps the connection alive. Brad didn't want people to focus on struggle or difficulty. He wanted them to remember the songs, the feeling, the shared understanding. And because of that, the door he opened through music never truly closes. It stays open, waiting, familiar, and real.